Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Adobe and Behance live stream. I'm your host, Fabiola Lara. Thank you so much for joining us today on Adobe Live's Week of Women in honor of Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which is tomorrow. This week, we are featuring women identifying artists, designers, photographers, and hosts. How amazing is that? I'm so excited for all the women on the stream this week. You can check out all the streams, everything that's going on right here, and make sure to tune in. So today on the stream, we're joined by illustrator and educator, Natasha Polozenko. We're so excited to have you here today, Natasha. How are you doing?
Hi, Fabiola. Thank you so much for having me. So excited. I am doing well. I'm doing great. Super amped up and can't wait to dive in.
Yes, so today Natasha is going to be showing us her workflow for character art using Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, so keep on watching for all her wisdom. Now, before we get started, if you missed the show before ours, be sure to watch the replays. Plus, check out the new Illustrator Creative Challenges with Gladys from Print My Soul every weekday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, right before this stream. And tune in and challenge yourself with a new prompt each day. Now, if you're tuning in from YouTube, go ahead and jump over to Behance by heading to behance.net/Adobe Live. You'll get the most interactive experience on Behance. So come join us while we learn from Natasha. If you're watching from Behance, we can actually chat, we can take your questions. It's way more fun. And remember, you can watch the live streams even when we're offline. So bookmark this page so you can come back to it whenever you need a little refresh. Now, let me take a look at the chat. We have so many awesome people here today. Mwendwa, Katarina, Richard, Becca, so excited to have you guys here today. And it's time, Natasha. Why don't you start this off by introducing yourself and tell us what we're up to today?
Awesome. Yes. So as Fabiola mentioned, my name is Natasha Polozenko. I'm also known as @Nataszko on Instagram, on TikTok. Education is my thing. I love creating tutorials. I love sharing tips, tricks, nuggets of wisdom. So if you ever need any of that, feel free to follow me on any of those socials. I also have a podcast, which I have titled The Self-Taught Illustrator. And this is sort of where I share some of my own experiences and some things that I've witnessed and experienced in my sort of journey of being a self-taught illustrator. And today, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking this illustration and going through the process of drawing it up in Illustrator and then moving into Photoshop to build out the details and add some of those extra bits of flair. So I'm excited.
Yes, I'm so excited to see this, to see how you build this out.
Thank you. Yes. So should I just jump in? Are we ready?
Yes. Yeah. If it's time, we can get right on into the stream, get right on into the workflow. Awesome. Kiss My Creative says, I love this art. So we're all pumped to watch you bring this to life.
Amazing. I'm super excited. Okay. So basically, so I usually just start off with like a sketch. Sometimes it's not as like detailed or as clean as this one, but I'll start off with any sketch. Sometimes it's even pen and paper sketch. I'll bring that into Adobe Illustrator, which is my one true love. Like I'm obsessed with Illustrator. It was like my first program that I sort of got started with. But basically, so I'll just bring that in. I have my artboard set at, I think 1080 by 1350. And once I bring that in, I'll always just sort of like, firstly, turn that to multiply and turn down the opacity a little bit. And I'm just sort of using it as like my reference point and guidelines.
Got it. Do you always, are you more likely to, like, how did you create this sketch? Because it looks so clean and tidy. I'm just curious where this started and now that you're bringing it over to Illustrator.
So like in terms of the ideas, like sometimes, so when it's an illustration like this one, I do a lot of illustrations where I will reference sort of historical imagery, like images in art that are very well known, and I'll try and recreate them in sort of like a modern way in my style. But this specific one was just sort of like like a freestyle illustration.
Nice.
Yeah, and so like when I set this up, usually like if I played you back a time lapse, it's like such a mess. It's like all over the place. It's like, you know, I'll start with something completely different, and this is sort of like after many iterations. But basically, it's just sort of focusing on the composition, the form, the shape, sort of like finding a pose that I find interesting enough, that I like, that I just vibe with. I guess.
It's very like complex, but also, yeah, the composition is like so pleasant. There's so many triangles in there.
Yes,
making my heart very happy.
Yeah, there's also like a lot of like as I was like figuring out how to position this arm, I was like trying to make it sort of like parallel to the other arm, and sort of just like keeping the geometry nice and pleasing to the eye.
Gorgeous, super pleasing. I think that the chat agrees here as well.
Thanks, guys. But yeah, so like I'm just going to turn down this opacity just a tiny bit more, but like one thing that I should probably mention that I think, you know, when I say this, sometimes people like yell at me, freak out, but I do everything with my trackpad. Like that's just sort of my my process. It may not be the best way to do things, but I don't know, I guess maybe being someone that is self-taught, I perhaps picked up some unhealthy habits. So as I'm going through this, creating this,
it's your workflow now. That's, you know, at least you're owning it. Why change it if it's working for you, you know?
I know. I am like a little bit nervous, because when I do tell people tell me like, oh, you know, like you're going to ruin your hands, like it's not good, like, you know, carpal tunnel's real. So I am aware of that. Maybe one day I'll sort of fix up the process, but for now I'm just like, you know, it's easy for me. It's awesome because I can sort of like take this workflow into a cafe. You know, I can do this on the plane.
Yeah, it's very mobile for sure. For sure. Exactly. Oh yeah, Voodoo Val's asking if you drew the sketch with a trackpad.
No. So the that was with an iPad.
Yeah. Trackpad and iPad are very similar words now. I was like, ooh, they're very easy to confuse. Yeah, guys, if you use, let us know in the chat. I'm curious to know what kind of tools you guys are using with Illustrator. If you're using, say, like a Wacom or your mouse pad, or maybe, I don't know, the iPad extension thingy that I know exists. Let us know.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know as well. I think that I love hearing about people's process.
When it comes to Illustrator, I feel like I just use my mouse or my trackpad because I'm just used to it, but I do admittedly use more Photoshop. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, I use a mouse and then the pen tool. Penny says, yep. I only have a mouse for Illustrator. Yeah, I think it's pretty common, but I can see what people are saying about, because my hand does cramp up after using the trackpad for a while with anything. Yeah,
that's true. I think that, you know, after a while, it can get a little bit, it's not ideal, but I'm glad that I'm not alone.
Yeah, no, you're totally not alone. Plus, like, I think you can adjust like the pressure sensitivities too. So, you know, that way you're not like pressing as hard or tapping as hard or whatever.
Yeah.
There's something there. All right. So you're using just the pen tool to trace out the shapes, but why did you do the fingers all different shapes as opposed to doing one big joined object?
So this is like if I'm just going to go to this for a second. So if I like have them all the same color, like the thing is like I can't really see like how this shape is looking in an easy way. So like if I do have them separate, like when I like go back and I can see like, okay, I accidentally created this random weird bend here, that it's easy for me to go in and like I love just to hit things with like the smooth tool.
Ooh, a little bit. I had no idea about that.
Yeah,
shocking. Shocking revelation just happened for me. I love that. That's so cool. Okay, so but that's the main reason that you broke it down into like each finger is its own as opposed to doing the hand as one object. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. So you'll see, like, when I take this into Photoshop, I'm going to be sort of working on each layer individually. And so like this allows me to, like, which we'll see later, like if I want to put shading on this finger, like it'll be like everything's going to be on its separate layer. So it makes it so much easier later on.
To shade. Yeah. That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. So you're saving yourself time on the other end.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, walk us through.
Yeah. And so like as I'm walking through this, I don't know, like as you mentioned, just sort of using the pen tool, kind of like being as sort of precise and clean as I can be, because I think that like that sort of saves sort of headaches down the road. But at the same time, like, you know, as I showed before, like when I do turn this off, I can always go in and like adjust later. But it's just sort of like trying to make sure that it's as exact at each stage is like a huge time saver.
For sure. Wow, you're using this pen tool so fast. Were you always this well versed with the pen tool?
Definitely not. So like as I mentioned, like I'm self-taught. I have a background in oh my God, I can't speak, in landscape architecture. I did my undergrad and my master's degree in landscape. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of this sort of stuff in like necessary in landscape. But I remember there was this one project that I did, like an assignment, and I decided that I wanted to create like little figure characters to pop into my landscapes. And I was doing it in Illustrator, but it was kind of like that style where you sort of just like trace a photograph. Like I feel like that's where we all start, where we just sort of like reference a photograph. And it was difficult. Like I found that it wasn't it did come to me naturally, but I think just after years and years of like just sticking with the pen tool, it just sort of like is like second nature at this point.
For sure. I feel like the pen tool is definitely one of those things you get comfortable with after just hours and hours of practice. There's almost like no shortcut. I mean, obviously watching someone do it, like we're watching Natasha work with the pen tool now, is one way to kind of understand how people make those decisions on, like, you know, right before a curve and right after a curve, you want to put like a node as opposed to trying to make it throughout and all these things. But yeah, it's definitely one of those tools that once you master, it seems like, how did I not understand in the beginning? But that first couple tries is always like so challenging.
So true. And another thing, like I have been wanting to sort of like move my whole process straight into Photoshop, because I do know that Photoshop has a pen tool.
Yes.
I just haven't like made the leap yet. Like I know that maybe some people are thinking like, why not just do this whole thing in Photoshop, since it's not going to be vector once we're done with it. And that's totally like, you know, that's an option. It's just for me, like, you know, haven't managed to do that yet.
Yeah. And if this is your process and it's what works for you, I don't see a reason to change it. Plus, then you still have that vector file to work from down the line. If you wanted to blow it up, then you just have to blow it up and maybe reshade it or whatever, as opposed to, you know, if it was fully a Photoshop file, you'd have to start from scratch again. So I can see the benefits. Plus, there's a lot of cool things you can do in Illustrator when it comes to color, and there's a lot of other tools that are handy for illustration work too, even though it's not as common. Ooh, I love seeing you adjust things, because I always think when I get something wrong in Illustrator, like, you know, I don't get it perfect. I'm like, oh, someone out there is getting it perfect. But and now this is the reality. Sometimes it's not completely perfect. You got to go back and adjust it. And that's real. This is not staged.
Exactly.
Yes.
At sometimes I like I think in the like in other illustrations, like sometimes I'll start creating something in Illustrator, and then I'll like, you know, I'll sort of deviate from the sketch a little bit. Like I'll be like, I don't like how her hair's looking, or you know. And so there's some like designing that also happens within this stage as well. But for this one, we're going to stay pretty true to what we're seeing here.
I love it. I'm very excited. Everyone's asking like about what tools you're using, and we keep having to remind them she's using the mouse. I
Yes.
love that. Okay.
There's a
So,
lot of, oh, yeah, go ahead.
oops. Yeah. So we're just gonna go through, and you're gonna keep filling out all. I love seeing how you're kind of changing the color as you go too.
Yeah,
Because it would be very confusing.
Yes, no, totally. It's just a matter of like keeping things visible and, you know, keeping it clean. But later we're gonna change it all to the same color, which, you know, all part of the process.
Yeah, then it'll all slowly come together. I'm so ready to see that stage. But until then, everyone in the chat, if you have questions about Natasha's process, drop your questions in the chat so we can get them answered, because you're here, you're joining, you're tuning in. May as well ask your questions and have Natasha let you know all about her process.
Yeah. You'll also notice sort of as I'm going through a lot of this, like there's a lot of center back, center front. Like sometimes it's like you'll see like here I've drawn this shape and it's sort of overlapping this and it's not meant to. So, you know, I think the keyboard shortcut is Shift Command backwards bracket. Yeah. And so like, you know, that sends it to back. So there's a lot of that happens. It's like a sort of like constant sort of rearranging that like takes place, which sometimes can get a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I could see that getting confusing once you're working with all the different shapes.
Yeah.
You know, because you have a lot of, especially specifically with this illustration, all the different what's it called, ins and outs of the arms and stuff. I can see that totally getting a bit confusing, but yeah. I'm excited to see how you master it.
Yeah. So like in that, you know, when it does get super confusing, sometimes I'll just like cut it off, because like when we move into Photoshop, this is going to be a lot easier to sort of like manage just this one shape versus like, you know, all the like sort of like intertwining things. So like, you know, sometimes it'll just be like, I just have to make sure that there's not like a big gap in here or anything. But yeah, sometimes there's like a little bit of trickery that goes on.
A little bit of back and forth. Yeah, but those little gaps will reveal themselves too as you go along and start filling it all out.
Totally.
So that's always helpful too.
Yeah.
Natasha, I know that you, aside from being an amazing illustrator yourself, as I can see here while we're working on this illustration, I know that you also do some coaching, some creative coaching and that kind of stuff. Do you have any tips for illustrators who are still kind of looking to find their style? Because yours is very tuned in, like fine-tuned and all of that, as you can see from this illustration. But what are your tips for someone who's still trying to, you know, find their style, the biggest quest on earth?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I love this topic. Like, I feel like I could talk about finding your style, like till the cows come home. And I feel like what I've found is that like with style, it can, like, I think that there's this sort of preconceived notion that like finding your style is sort of will come with time, which is true. Like, you know, if you do art for a long time, if you're an illustrator for a long time, like your style will come with time. But I do believe that you can also take meaningful steps to like sort of expedite that process if you wanted to sort of like narrow in on a style that feels like it's uniquely you, like it sort of represents who you are. And I think that it's kind of more like a process of soul searching. Like your style isn't a decision. It's not like, I want to do this style and I'm going to stick with this. Your style is sort of like a mixture of your, like who you are, your experiences, your taste, like your preferences. Like there are all of these sort of parts that you can sort of start to interrogate and sort of like dig in and sort of uncover about yourself that will start to inform like how your style can sort of start to come to life.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Considering like all the different elements of things that you like, of your taste, essentially, to inform your style is such a powerful point of view. Because usually people are just like, you just have to draw. You got to put in your 10,000 hours. And that sounds so overwhelming.
Yes. And I mean, like the 10,000 hour, like I call it like the 10,000 hour myth, where it's like, yes, if you're a violinist or something, like, yes, like 10,000 hours is going to help you because it is like this process of practice. It's like getting better. But like with creative practices, like, you know, like art, for example, it's like you have people who like are like prodigies, like right off the bat, like you like,
That's so
the
true.
10,000 hours isn't necessary. It's, I feel like great art is sort of like something that you believe in. It's something that represents who you are. It's what your message is. You know, I think like a lot of people measure their success and sort of how good their art is based on how many followers they have, or how, you know, like there's these
Yeah, it can be a
arbitrary.
there's a lot of things that can influence your work, and you have to really be careful what you're
Absolutely.
taking to heart, right? What you're letting
Yes.
influence your work. And I think that's what you're saying about uh looking at what your taste is beyond just art, right? What you like, what kind of stuff you like to consume, and let that influence it, as
Yes.
opposed to maybe giving likes too much importance.
Yes, so true. And
It's
like
a fine
the
balance.
influences are like, they can be sort of art related, where it's like there's certain
Mm-hmm.
artists that you love, certain illustrators, but it can also be like abstract, like certain like the like certain ideas or feelings can sort of start to influence your art, like certain values that you have. Like there's just so much, like art is very emotional, and I think that like understanding sort of like who you are, like, and pouring that into what you create, it's just like you can really like create some unique things then, rather than like, I feel like there are so many trends in art,
Yeah.
in illustration specifically, that I think that, you know, if you're on social media, you kind of start to see a lot of like the same thing, like sort of almost regurgitated. And so like finding that unique style, I think, is so valuable, and just like makes things more fun, in my opinion.
Definitely. It definitely does when you finally hone in on your style and your voice, right? What you're trying to say with that style. It just is
Yes.
like a game changer, as opposed to, yeah, falling into the trend traps. That sometimes trends are fun though, but you also have to bring your own twist to it sometimes. We
Yes.
have a question here from Luke Sims. Do you use this process on your iPad Pro with the pencil ever?
No, I don't.
Because there's
As
Illustrator for iPad. So I'm assuming that's where they were going with this question, using Illustrator on the iPad as opposed to the trackpad.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done that. I think that's something that I'm definitely willing to try out. Like, I think that anything that can sort of help speed up this process. But yeah, short answer, no, I haven't done that yet.
But I could totally see how you could do it. So Luke Sims, if you want to give it a shot on the iPad, on Illustrator for
Yes.
iPad, I'm sure you could follow along with this stream and play with the pen tool there for sure.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many like tools, so many pros. Like, there's just like so many things to try, so little time. Like, I just wish I could, like, you know.
And it's really hard to, once you have your process fine tuned, to want to then just switch it for seemingly no reason, right? Like, yeah,
Yes.
you may be faster at it, but you're pretty fast, as we can all attest to while we watch this. She is zooming through these tracings.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you guys have any questions about the way she's working, the way Natasha, anything about her work or her career, let us know in the chat. Come over to behance.net/Adobe Live and we'll take your questions and we'll answer them. So super cool. You get your questions answered. You don't have to sit in the sidelines. You can join us, join the chat, come hang out while we work. Ooh, I love seeing this. I love like seeing how you make the distinction between the shapes and even just the lines, because you know you could have just left that line out, but you brought it back.
Yeah, I like, it's, you know, I think that like this is sort of like, as you start to find your style and stuff, like for me, I think like style guides are really helpful. And for me, sort of like this like a lot of strokes, like sort of these bold, like sort of like what you call the butt cap strokes, like make make their way into a lot of my illustrations, and I try to, like, where possible, like have them come back. Sometimes it's like in the hair, sometimes it's on the face, but like I love including sort of like, you know, with the sort of complexity that's going on, also like sort of adding these like very simple lines, just like
yeah, there's definitely, I can totally see a consistency within this illustration, and I'm sure we'll keep seeing it as you fill out the objects involved with the illustration. Ooh, it's so satisfying to see you like add these objects in. Let's see. Caroline wants to know if you use real life images, I'm assuming as a reference.
Yes, definitely. So so a lot of my pieces I will use so not they are images that they're like historical images. So I've done, you know, a few illustrations based on like historical artworks, but sometimes like if I have a pose in mind, like, and let's say the pose is a bit complex, or especially it's always the hands for me. Like hands are just the bane of my existence. I will like take a photo of myself in the mirror where I'll like, you know, like if I'm like holding something, and then I'll like take a photo with my phone. Like I have so many weird photos in my camera roll of me just like posing. But yeah, I always like, whenever something's looking a little bit funky, I'll sort of like refer back to sort of real life, and like try and use those kinds of images to help me along.
That makes sense. Even though your illustration style is very stylized, right, and removed from like realism, I can totally see what you're saying, that a realistic photo reference in essence helps you kind of fine tune that pose or that angle or that perspective to make sure it still has some like basis of reality in a sense, even though like, you know, I could see what you're saying about the hands, but I also feel like in your style you could tell me a hand works differently and I would probably believe it.
Yeah, like I mean, I feel like, you know, even with like styles where the proportions are all funky and like, you know, are looking a little like sort of unrealistic, like the basic mechanics of how a hand works is still like the same, you know, like sometimes, especially if it's like a very weird pose, you're like, wait, how does that actually work? And like having the real life reference is like very necessary for me anyway.
I think it just helps anchor the illustration. That way you're not just like guessing, and it doesn't look awkward, right? Because you don't want something to be distracting. So if you draw a hand and it's like doing something completely weird, it might be distracting if it's not the focus of the illustration. And I think that's why, like, even though your characters are very stylized, it's still like kind of rooted in the mechanics of the human figure.
Yes, so true.
We have this question from Kiss My Creative, if you've ever tried using vector in Adobe Fresco, because there's vector tools within the Fresco app.
No, I haven't, but like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing and informative. I need to try. I've never.
People are just curious. They want to know. I think also Illustrator can be intimidating sometimes. And so it's like, what about all these other options?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone in the chat, I'm sure you can make it happen in Fresco if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to try it. I've, you know, heard great things about Fresco, so I definitely want to do that. But yeah, I think like any program that like sort of allows you, like even Photoshop, as I mentioned before, like allows you, like it gives you capabilities to like create paths and stuff. Like I think you could basically replicate this process like anywhere, but like, you know, as we've mentioned, just sort of like Illustrator's become a bit of my comfort zone, so
exactly.
That's why I use it.
I also think like some of those fluid forms that you have that are very organic but also sharp, it could maybe be hard to recreate in another program, just because the pen tool is helping guide that, like, and makes it easier in a sense to create that form that feels fluid but is still, you know, you've shaped it yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely like my experience. Like I have tried in the past, but it's always like, you know, like you once you have a process down, like you want to be able to create quickly, and the idea of sort of learning another program sort of from scratch when you already sort of have a process is sometimes like a little like intimidating, but yeah, whatever works.
If it's not broken,
yeah, exactly. Love it.
Someone's at Roz here is asking, it's amazing that you're able to keep up a conversation while doing this work. When you're not being interviewed, do you multitask while illustrating? This is a very good question.
That's an excellent question. You know what? I actually, I watch a lot of like shows while I'm illustrating. Like it's sort of like the time I have to sort of like binge TV, because it's kind of like, I have my computer here. I sort of watch the shows in the background, which is, like I don't feel so bad about binging TV if I'm at least being a little bit productive.
Yes,
so.
I know exactly what you mean. That's also how I work a lot, with like background TV as my company. What's your, what are you watching lately?
So it's funny because I feel like I'll always try like and pick a show that I don't feel like I really need to concentrate that much on, like that I can like, I can just sort of glaze over, but then I end up getting like really sucked into like really bad shows. So my most recent one, which I'm like obsessed with, is Vampire Diaries. Like I didn't watch it like back in the day, so I just started live, this year. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, this show, it's got me.
I love that. I did the same thing with like Dawson's Creek, because like it was like years later, but I was like, sure, it's, there's 10 seasons. So I have plenty of company while I work. I totally relate to that. Let us know in the chat if you watch any shows to keep you company while you work. I feel like it's, become more and more of a pandemic reality as well. It's just how we work now.
And Fabiola, tell me if like you can relate to this, but sometimes I'll like look back on an illustration that I did a long time ago, and then I'll be like, oh, I remember exactly what show I was watching while I was creating this.
Sometimes, but for me, I'm so like kind of in between. My brain is neither watching TV nor drawing, that I kind of like lose sense of time. I've most recently started watching a lot of just like dating reality shows, because you really don't have to, you're not going to miss much, it's pretty seamless. So
yes. Yeah. Doesn't require any brain power. It's just.
I also listen to a lot of podcasts. Do you listen to podcasts while you work? I feel like it's.
Oh yeah, I love listening to podcasts, and a lot of the time they're just like, I mean, I have like a broad range of interests when it comes to podcasts. Like I love my crime podcasts. The ones that are a little bit more like informational and informative. But yeah, I'm a big like podcast fan.
That definitely explains why you have your own podcast.
Yes.
All right. Do you ever listen to yourself while you work? I'm sure you have, out of the obligation to, check on the episode.
Oh my gosh. There's something just unnatural about listening to yourself talk. Like I feel like I do it a lot more than I wish I had to, but It's just like, I think there's no one that loves the sound of their voice.
I don't know. I feel like I used to be weird about it, and now I just kind of got used to it. Now I'm just like, that's what I sound like. It's my reality. This is who I am. Oh yeah. Everyone in the chat is saying they watch a lot of podcasts, a lot of dating shows, and even Behance streams. So if you're listening to us while you work, good on you, because you're learning and you're working, and it's the perfect thing to put on. Amazing. Okay, so I have been watching how you're working, and I'm very curious as to I just like love seeing how you make these decisions on what to make like this, right? You've decided to keep the foot out of it, but I thought you were going to go and do that whole foot plus the leg, but you're kind of breaking it into almost like the actual parts of the human body. You have them all isolated. Can you remind us why you're doing that for those who maybe are just tuning in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like typically I'll try and like, I'll think forward to my Photoshop. Like when I go into Photoshop, I'll want to have like the shapes be as simple as possible. So typically, you know, I could just do this whole thing, this whole leg as like one shape and not and include the foot in there as well. Like I probably would do that if I was in a little bit more of a rush. But here it's just like I kind of want that little bit of extra, like, because the foot is kind of like sitting behind the leg, like when we go into Photoshop, it'll become more evident, but there's going to be like a little bit of shading here that helps sort of like help separate.
So the reason for all the different objects, as opposed to making one big unified object, is to help you with shading down the road.
Yes, exactly. So like you'll see, like, you know, the reason why I'm not creating this as sort of like, you know, one shape like this leg, is that like I want to sort of like create this sort of like crease here, like this clean crease. And you'll see like when we get into Photoshop, it starts to get a little bit like, sometimes it's a little bit hard to navigate, but like where you sort of like come up on a shape like this, like here, you don't want shading to go here, but that's where sort of like in Photoshop, you sort of start to like negotiate those things in there. But I think it'll be a lot more clearer once we jump in there.
Yes. I love seeing just like, for you, these decisions are so natural because this process is so fine-tuned. And so that's why I'm like, wait a minute, you are making some decisions and I don't understand, or I want to know more. I love to see it though, but I totally already foresee what you're saying about making those negotiations in Photoshop to make sure you don't have too much shading or have shading where you don't need it. I could see that being a challenge.
Yeah. And I think if anyone sort of like is interested in this process and like trying it out for themselves, like, you know, it is like, you know, you'll do it the first time and then you'll sort of like start to understand why like I'm sort of chopping up certain pieces of the body. And then like the next time you do it, like you'll already have in your mind like, oh, okay, like, you know, that's why I have to like draw it in so many shapes versus like, you know, versus just like drawing the hand.
Shape. Yeah. Totally.
And it also depends on how complex you want to get, right? Like if you're creating something that's a lot more simple, like, you know, you could definitely get away with like less sort of detail.
Yeah. Oh, I'm also very interested to see how you are gonna like organize all of this for once we move into Photoshop. I'm already curious, but I'll wait.
Yes.
I'll wait until we're there. Just a little reminder for everyone, if you have questions for Natasha, pop them in the chat. I will ask her while she works and we'll get you your amazing answer. And if you're tuning in from YouTube, if you're watching the stream from YouTube, I need you to move over to Behance, because on Behance, we can actually talk to you. We can actually answer your questions. Honestly, you'll have a better time. So come over to behance.net/Adobe Live, come watch the stream, and we'll continue watching Natasha's process. Natasha, that was so fast. It seems to me like you have all the objects, but please give us an update.
Yes. So we're actually going to start to move onto the process of like moving into Photoshop. So it's good that you bring up sort of like how to organize this and like layers and stuff, because that's what we are about to do. And so like if you are sort of trying out this process, I would sort of like at this point make sure that you haven't like grouped anything, or just like make sure that you ungroup before you move on to the next process. And you'll see here that I've created everything on its own layer. Like it's all on the same layer, and that was by design, that was on purpose, because what we do now is like once you select everything and go up to this little hamburger menu, I do like release to layers sequence. And basically what that does is sort of it like explodes that whole, like everything that you did into its individual layers. So even like each eyelash will be sort of on its own layer. And then like they're like nested under this layer, but in order to sort of move into Photoshop, what we want to do is like unnest it. So now like it's well and truly like everything is on its own layer.
And the reason you didn't just start doing this on its own is because why didn't you just start working in separate layers from the beginning?
Yeah, so if I had done that, it just would be like extremely tedious in like create new layer. And like, it's like, sometimes you forget, like, especially if you're like on a roll, like you're creating shapes. It's like, if I had to sort of like draw this like eyelash line, and do a new layer and then do another layer. And like having to remember that, every single time you create a new shape is just like, you could do that. It totally would work. But at the same time, if it's just as simple as doing expand to sequence, like it's just like easier for me anyway.
And now you've guaranteed that you have every object on its own layer.
Yes. And I actually like, I mean, I can totally do it now, but typically before I expand, I'll like make sure everything's the right color. So I'll quickly do that now. But like, I have my little like color palette that I have set up here for this particular illustration. Like it does sort of shift between if I'm doing like illustrations that have a different like skin tone, but for this one, I already sort of like have it pre-prepared. Okay. And then so like, I'm just sort of like going to go through and like very quickly like give turn every shape into the color that it's meant to be.
Ooh, I love that. That's like the coolest thing about working in Illustrator right now is that you're just selecting and changing the colors so quickly. And I know that there's like little ways for you to maybe accomplish that in Photoshop, but this is like so well organized. And that's kind of like, I feel like the advantage of working in Illustrator, even though it's not as common.
Yes, I totally agree. And I feel like that's sort of like, that's the reason why I use it. Like, it's just such like it's just very clean.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. The nature of vectors, I guess.
Yeah. And so
yes, everyone's realizing you're Australian.
Yes. How can they tell?
Congrats to the chat for sorting that one out. I'm very excited for all of us to have this beautiful Australian accent with us today. Okay, so now you've designated the colors.
Yes. So now like this is sort of like like this is one of those examples of like, here's one I prepared earlier. So like I have everything sort of the right colors. Like, I always like try and like, I'll do like one sort of like uniform skin tone. Me personally, like I like to keep all the colors very like minimal at this stage where it's like the hair, the eyes, the eyebrows, lips, everything is like this sort of like one like dark red sort of color. I have all my layers on the separate layers. Like it's, so at this point I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. So from here I would go file, export as, and then I like just save it out as a Photoshop document. So I would just hit Photoshop and then hit export, and that's it. So like once you've done that, you can basically open up, like this is what it will look like when you open it up in Photoshop. And I think I just like dropped in like a creamy background because the white was probably hurting my eyes at the point. But this is like, this is sort of like the clean sort of like Illustrator to Photoshop sort of.
And all of those layers, are they all related back to the shapes that you had in Illustrator?
Yes. So you'll see here in the like layers panel, like there's like many, many layers. They're not named because I did do that explode. But like sometimes, for this character doesn't have clothes, but sometimes if they do have clothes, I'll like look for those layers and I'll ghost them out, work on the body first, and then add the clothes later. But yeah, but for now we just have like a simple figure. There's not too much to it. But I'd love to sort of start going into the process of like shading and how I go about this.
Yeah, tell us your thought process. Walk us through every single detail. We do not want to miss a thing, Natasha.
Yes, of course. So like one thing that I think that a lot of people will see like a lot of layers that are unnamed and silently freak out. And something that like was a lifesaver for me, which is like a cool tip and trick that I don't know if this is like something that people already know or not, but if you hold down the function key and click a layer, it will sort of like select it for you. So that sort of helps with workflow and not having to like panic about finding layers. So if I want to like select her hair, for example, function click, and you can see that I have that layer selected.
Cool.
So that's
so
like a
handy.
little, yeah, super handy. Like if you're dealing with a lot of layers, like, and you'll see in a moment, like it's just like, as you're jumping between different layers, like so necessary. So I'm going to start with this on the left. And basically what I do, the way that I like to start is by doing like sort of very subtle shading. Like you'll see it's like just to sort of get the sort of basic shapes in there, but I'll create a new layer, which is right above this. And like, I don't know what you call it, like parent it to that layer.
I think it's a clipping mask. I'm pretty
clipping
sure.
mask. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So like, and the way I just did that was hold Option, hover above that layer, and hit click. And so you can see that layer is now sort of like, belongs to that layer.
Yes.
But I just grab a grainy textured brush. I pick the color that I'm going to do, and I usually like to start off with a very low opacity and sort of take a more building approach. I'll make it a little bit darker. But as you can see, you start to
immediately create that depth.
Yeah, exactly. So you're starting to just sort of build out a little bit of dimension. I always take this process very slow. It's good to sort of be slow and steady in this process, because sometimes if you go in with a very dark shadow, you can make mistakes. So I just like to be very subtle in the way that I do this.
Gradual build up, almost
yes.
like a self tanner.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally get it. Okay. Tell us about this brush. What brush is this? I feel like we're going to get that question, so I'm just getting ahead of it.
Yeah,
what brush are you using?
So this is a grainy brush. This is a custom one that I created, and
cool.
And I mean, you could use any grainy brush. I've definitely used different brushes in the past. I do have this one on my website for sale, not to be self-promoting too much.
Yeah, but if you're interested in using this exact brush, now you know where to get it.
Yeah. I also have a tutorial on YouTube that goes through this process as well, but you're getting it firsthand here. So
yeah.
And so this is actually interesting. This is what I was talking about before, where you start to come into these not issues, but it's where the finger starts to it's not flowing, the arm's looking good, that's looking great, but what happens when it sort of runs
reaches
into
that.
this finger?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. I'll just sort of create a layer over the top, and it's just trying to sort of blend it in like
makeup for sure.
Yes, exactly.
This is just reminding me so much of makeup.
So true.
Right? You want blended out, but not too much, but not too little. Ooh, I like it.
And then sometimes,
I was gonna ask you, how are you not losing track of because the shapes are so flat, and then you're just kind of how do you just at this point mentally know exactly where you need to go? Because I feel like I would be a bit overwhelmed here, not knowing the differences between all of the shapes that you created previously.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Sometimes I'll for example, I don't really know what's happening down here right now. And so if I select a layer, and I'll kind of just I have my brush ready, I can even just okay, that's where it starts. You know what I mean? Okay. So then I know to kind of and then I didn't remember that there was something running into there, but I just follow the shape, and I can sort of just get a feel for it.
Yeah. And I guess also you can always undo.
Yes, you can undo. That's the beauty of digital art. Yeah. But then also I sometimes I'll have my line work here, just if I ever need it. Sometimes it is helpful to have it.
I forgot we had that there from the Illustrator file. So handy.
Yes, so handy.
All right. So as you continue to shade this gorgeous figure, I have a question here from Danica Jovanovic. I hope I said your name correctly. So how did you start your illustration career? Can you walk us through I'm sure maybe this is a big question. So maybe the first project or something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned, don't have a background in illustration, have a background in design, so landscape architecture. And the way that I sort of started off like illustrating it, like in general, was sort of like self-motivated projects. Like I would sort of like, you know, just creating, you know, like just like doing my best to sort of like improve, develop my style, like just like learning is so huge. Like I went through it also, like slight digression, but like also like I do like a little bit of motion graphics. So like so like I was just like taking online classes. I was on YouTube, just sort of like soaking up as much like information that I could. But then when it came to sort of like, I made a career pivot after landscape and sort of went into what you would call visual design. So that is sort of like in the company that I was working with, was sort of like, you know, doing UI, UX, doing sort of like, I'd be drawing storyboards, and I really expressed my interest in sort of developing my skills in sort of like, you know, my visual skills. And so they really supported me and helped me sort of like get on projects that had more of like a visual design component to it. Right. So that's when I started like, you know, developing my skills more, getting like illustration projects within my company. But then I also did like a lot of things sort of for myself on the side, where I was taking on commissions. I was doing some freelance stuff, and it just sort of like grew from there.
Yeah, it sounds like you are really putting yourself out there and letting it be known that you were kind of trying to move in a specific direction, and taking the opportunities as they came, right? And making your own opportunities too.
Absolutely.
That's good advice and even inspiration for someone who maybe feels like they want to make that pivot.
Yeah, I think with being an illustrator, it's like it's not, you're not a doctor, you know what I mean? Like if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, yes, you need those credentials. Basically if you decide you want to be an illustrator, like you're an illustrator, you know, it's just like, you can like pick up a pencil, you can be an artist, like it's just all like, you know, it's something that you can decide to be, and like you can decide how far you want to go with that.
For sure. I think that's like it's a very empowering message, right? Like if you want to be an illustrator, start drawing, and now you're an illustrator. And that's exactly. Like, it's beautiful. I'm excited for everyone. Plus, if you're watching this stream, I don't know, I feel like you're pretty close to being an illustrator because you're learning a lot right now.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like by osmosis.
Exactly. Wow. I loved seeing that foot come to life. I like that you left the ankle crease kind of, right? Like that was a deliberate choice to leave that little bit of that, I don't even know how to say, that subtle ankle line. I'd love to see it. And now you're blending it out.
Yes. And so one thing that like is also like important to mention. So like, you know, this original shape that I drew, like you'll see that there's sort of like I'm like pointing at my screen, forgetting that I have a mouse. Like there's this sort of like something that looks a little unnatural happening here. Something that is like also like I love to do is like, if you erase that original layer that you created, it's sort of like, you know, like feather out the edge. It sort of like helps you out with the blending, like, you know, and that's sort of like that already looks a lot more natural. But yeah, if you go too far, you'll start to, you know,
erase key limbs.
Yes. That is not what we want.
All right. Wow. It's crazy how much, like how different it looks just by adding this shading. I feel like we're facing a completely different drawing than we were over in Illustrator.
Yes, totally. And I think like the key to this is just like, it's just your brush. I mean, your brush, the eraser tool, and it's, you know, just going in and sort of doing, building out those basic shapes. I want to sort of like jump onto like sort of like a, you know, here's one I prepared earlier, sort of thing, because I know that like, you know, it might be getting a little bit boring for people. But you can see that sort of like, this is just like the sort of like basic base shading. And like, depending on like how, like you could have gone in immediately with a darker color, a little bit more, sort of like bold to begin with, but sort of like, this is like the way that I like to work. And then the next thing I'll do is like, I take a darker color. So I usually I like this like purple, and I sort of like go in and add more and more sort of like dimension to it. So like it's basically like the same thing. So like I, create another clipping mask on top of that, and I'll just sort of like go in and like continue to like add more and more of this this shading.
But now you've like colored the light a little bit, colored the not the light, the shade.
Yes, exactly.
Ooh, that is very satisfying to watch. I love seeing this come to life like this. I feel like I've seen your work, so I kind of knew where we were headed, but kind of getting into the granular details of how all of this comes together is so satisfying. If you're just joining us on the stream, right? Because we've been working here with Natasha for a bit. If you're just tuning in, we're over in Photoshop. Natasha's showing us her workflow for these character illustrations. If you have questions, drop them in the chat over in the Behance stream, which is where we're all hanging out at behance.net/Adobe Live. Drop your questions. We'll answer as Natasha continues to shade her heart out. I love to see all of this. Natasha, while you're working on this, I have a question. I saw on your website that you really liked Nickelodeon as a kid.
Yes.
You were a fan of Nickelodeon. What were some of your favorite Nickelodeon shows as a kid to watch?
Oh my gosh, yes. And this may be like aging myself a little bit, but I was such a fan of Hey Arnold,
Yes.
like Totally Spies. Pretty sure that was Nickelodeon. Oh my gosh, there were so many. But I like, and it was like, so in Australia, it was like Nickelodeon was like a cable show, and so like we didn't like for the longest time didn't have it, but whenever we were like over at like friends' place or like cousins, and like we'd be like watching Nickelodeon, and that's like, I think that's where my like love for illustration like was born. I remember like my sister and I would like talk about like creating characters that we wanted to, like that we were going to sort of like pitch to Nickelodeon. So that was our thing.
I love that. It's such an earnest place to be like, yeah, I'm going to pitch a cartoon when you're a kid. I mean, you're an expert at cartoons when you're a kid, so I get it.
Of course.
I felt the same thing. I always drew SpongeBob when I was watching Nickelodeon. I would always sit there and just draw SpongeBob in different like angles like for hours. So I had to ask because I'm always curious. And yeah, Hey Arnold was amazing. I mean, yes, it had a really cool studio like cast of people working on it. I think we have a question. Oh no. I was wondering, and this is based off some of the conversation over in the chat, why do you feel like you rather do this shading in Photoshop versus Illustrator?
So I have like played around with trying to do some of this shading in Illustrator in the past. In fact, like on my Instagram, I recently did like a sort of post that's sort of like a deep dive into the differences between shading in Photoshop and shading in Illustrator, where I take the same illustration and I did it two ways. So I did like a version where I shaded in Photoshop, as like you're seeing here, and then a version where I tried to do it like to the same level and quality in Illustrator. And for me, there's just no comparison. Like, I think it is a lot more difficult, and you're not able to get this same sort of like detail and control. And I could be wrong. Like, maybe there are people out there who shade like, crazy, like, I don't know, like are able to achieve like the same sort of like level of like control. But like for me personally, I just like couldn't do it.
Yeah, it feels definitely like more natural in Photoshop, especially given like that you can do those multiple passes and make specific like little corners and turns a little darker or a little lighter. So I can totally understand why this is better suited for Photoshop. But I just wanted to see, where you stood on that, because we did make that change from one program to the other. Now everyone's talking about the shows that they worked on as a kid. The shows they worked on as a kid.
Didn't we all?
Because we all worked on our own shows
in our minds.
Okay, yeah, see, like how you just added that like darker shading to the bottom to make it have kind of some more weight. Yeah, that would be difficult to achieve, because I feel like Illustrator would make it very even. So then it would kind of all look the same volume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It'd be cool because then you like would be able to keep it vector, right? But then like, you know, it's just hard.
It's just hard. It's just
Yeah.
hard. This just works. Okay. Yeah. Loving it. Oh, oh, we have a crease there. Are you gonna keep it?
No, I'm going to sort that out. I'm going to first try
I love
and,
seeing those moments because you're so masterful with the like you have like the perfect touch with the brush. You can like perfectly blend it out. I'm sure that took a bit of time to master.
Yeah, I think like when I first started like using this process, like it was like a bit annoying, but I feel like it's just something that you sort of like start to like, you know, get a feel for after a while.
Definitely. Okay. Tell us where we're at and where we're going, Natasha.
All right. So I guess we're like halfway through, which like, to be honest, like I feel like we're moving quicker than I thought we would.
Yeah,
but
we definitely are.
Well, like basically, you know, we've done sort of this first pass, this like brown sort of like shading. Now I'm going through with like, just like adding a little bit more dimension to like, to the body, to the figure. Yep. And you know, sometimes like I'll find like if I feel like the brown is getting a little bit lost, like sometimes I'll go in and like edit it as like slightly. So I like, you know, I have my palette there. Like let's say if I want to add like, you know, I'm like, okay, that leg, just like I need the brown to be poking out a little bit more. I can like go ahead and just sort of like very subtly like start to curve it out, you know. And you know, this is why it's great to like watch shows while I'm like illustrating, because it's like sometimes this can be like a tedious process, and like especially like, you know, I am kind of working maybe a little bit faster than I usually would be right now, but like, you know, when it's like when you're sort of playing around with like shading, it's sometimes like it's not just one pass and it's done. Like it's sort of like a process that you're sort of like basically like carving out after a while, and like, you know,
and balancing all of the different things. I feel like as you start developing one section, you might realize another section's a little bit underdeveloped or overdeveloped or whatever. So I can totally see what you mean about like it's kind of a bit of a back and forth within the figure, getting it all in the right place.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so while you continue to work on that, I'm going to keep badgering you with some questions.
Please do.
If you're tuning in, drop your questions in the chat. I'll pass them along and we'll get your question answered. But in the meantime, so I know you do like some portfolio reviews as a part of your work. And so I was wondering, what is the one portfolio mistake you always see in illustration portfolios that you feel like, you know, this is your moment to send out a general PSA to everyone about their portfolios? Do you have that one thing that keeps coming up?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's like I think that a lot of people, like, it's kind of basically when it comes down to it, it's sort of it's creating without like a purpose or a clear intention, you know? And I think that like sometimes like I'll look at a portfolio and I'm kind of unsure, like what is sort of like the end game? What's the goal? Is it like, are you attracting freelance clients? Like, are you creating for art for a specific group of people that you want to sort of like appeal to? And sort of like, that's where it's sort of like, you know, I think that there's so much power and clarity in having that sort of like, you know, I go to your page, Fabiola, and I know exactly sort of like I know what to expect from your future posts. You know what I mean? I feel like that's what people want when they like, you know, when they sort of like land on a portfolio or on an Instagram page where it's like, who is this person? What can I expect? Like a lot of the time, like, I think that like a portfolio is sort of filled with experimentation, which is cool, which is fine. Like, I think that, you know, we all start somewhere, but I think there needs to be sort of like a shell for it. Like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm like, you know, I'm a student, like that's sort of like finding my style, experimenting, and sort of like, it's almost like a question of branding. Like, who are you? Yeah. Sort of like, what are you here for?
And making it easier for that person who's looking at your portfolio to immediately know your direction.
Yes. Totally.
But But it can be really hard to feel like as an illustrator and as a creative person to figure out that direction. Do you have any advice for someone who doesn't know what direction to go with their artwork, right? So like they haven't picked a lane per se. What would you recommend for someone like that?
Yeah, I think that like it does take a little bit of soul searching. I think like, especially like, I think when you're at the level where you're at school, whether you have a art degree or not, like if you're in that world already or not, like there's a desire to sort of like go where the money is, and sort of people will try and like, you know, I guess like focus everything that they're doing on like what will get me that like high paying job, or sort of what will like help me, like what will impress other people. And I think like my biggest thing is sort of like, you know, there is so much power in just being so confident in like what you do and like what you offer. And so like I think that like figuring out what it is that you really want to do, like we were talking about style before, right? Like I think that like part of it is like developing, like, although I know it's like easier said than done, but like really starting to do that sort of like groundwork of like why am I creating art? Like how should this art manifest? Like what's that style that I'm going to put forward? Like I think that these are all questions that it's just like, you know, giving yourself the time to like at least ask yourself that question is like, I think so key.
Really be honest with yourself about the direction you want to go in, aside from just the financial, you know, pull to go a certain way. Like, you know, maybe you want to get into UX UI because it's a coveted industry, but maybe you don't like doing it.
Yes.
And it's something to reconsider. And how did you decide to kind of make that leap into illustration? Was there ever like that moment where you were like, okay, I'm going to break away and do illustration and get away from the work you were doing before that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that like, you know, it was definitely that like I think like even back in my like landscape days, it was kind of like, I mean, like there's nothing wrong with pivoting, you know, we're all human. We all like make certain decisions, and like we don't have to be stuck with those decisions for the rest of our lives. But I feel like through like, you know, taking the leap and doing like landscape architecture and like getting experience in the field, going to work at companies, I like kind of found myself like unfulfilled, right? And so like I was like, oh, I really don't think I can like do this for like for the rest of my life. And so like I just sort of like jumped to my next curiosity. So what was that thing in my mind that I was like, oh, this would be a really cool like profession or a really cool job to try. And so like, you know, I think I had some like friends that were sort of in that world. And so I was like, oh, okay, like, you know, I can try this out. Like, we'll see where it goes. And like, I already have like, I guess I have like design skills. Like I kind of like, I went to some sort of design school. So like I, you know, kind of like pivoted in that way. And then I feel like going from landscape to like UI and like digital design kind of got me closer to the world of illustration. And so then from illustration, it was then another pivot. And so like, I think like, you know, I'm such a fan of pivots, you know, like I think that people almost see them as failures, like, you know, like, oh, like I kind of failed at this thing, or I wasn't able to like make it work in this, you know, profession that I had originally thought I would. And that's like totally fine. Like, I think that, you know, there are the few that like these prodigies who like decide what they want to be when they're like, you know, coming out of college and then stick with it for the rest of their lives. But like, there are a whole lot of people who also are just sort of like, you know, trying different things and like jumping around, which I think is totally fine.
Yeah. And I feel like specifically for illustration, it's one of those professions that people come across later. They don't realize that it's a profession until maybe they've already finished school, or, you know, I feel like you're exposed to illustration work all the time, all around you. You know, you were watching Nickelodeon, but we didn't necessarily, I'm speaking for myself now, know that it was a profession, a viable career until later. And, you know, making that pivot is just because you've discovered something else that you want to do.
That couldn't ring more true. Like, I feel like when I thought of illustration, I kind of thought of it like, oh, I'd have to work for like Nickelodeon or Disney. Like, I always saw that as like like a cartoonist, in my mind, was like what illustration was. And then sort of like through the process of like getting into the world of digital design and being like, oh, there are a whole bunch of like illustrators who like are employed, it's not like there's like, I guess, the myth of the starving artist that comes to mind when it comes to like this idea of being like making art your career. And I think that like, it's like once you come to that realization, it sort of like opens a lot of doors for you, which is definitely
and then it's up to you to decide if you want to go through that door and make those changes to your life and to your career, to take that leap of faith for your own creative career. Yes, absolutely. Haley says, I had no clue that illustration was a true career path. I think that happens to a lot of people. It's something that you realize later once you discover people like Natasha who are making it happen and other illustrators whose work is out there. Then you start to think, wait, there's people doing this and making money, making a living.
Totally.
I love it. So speaking of this shift, what was like your first illustration paid gig that you were like, that really kind of tipped you over the edge and you were like, I have to do this?
Yeah. So my first paid one was like, I think I'd done like a few commissions that were like, kind of like, I wasn't charging a lot. And like my first ones were like, kind of like friends of friends, and so like, I wasn't like,
that's how you start though. That's very common.
Yeah.
With those like friends of friend commissions. And I think that's valid.
Yeah. And I mean, it was great because it sort of also like taught me the process, but like I like was charging like close to nothing. And then like I got a commission that was kind of like, it seemed like it was for someone's like, they wanted like a illustrated character for their website. And it was sort of like a more it was someone I didn't know, someone who had found me through Instagram. And that was sort of like the first time that I actually like, I like charged properly, and like, I think I like it kind of gave me this sort of boost of confidence, and like, they said they were happy with it afterwards. And so I was like, okay, like this is a thing. But I do have to say, like, I have this like illustration practice, but at the same time I am working like as a visual designer, like in-house, at a company. So it's like, I haven't like fully made the like, the leap yet. But
all with time. I feel like there's a lot to learn by being an in-house designer. And I think that there's nothing, I feel like you're no less an illustrator because you have an in-house gig, or because you're still a designer and you're learning, and everything kind of commingles too. Like your design skills, I'm sure, influence your illustration, and vice versa, right? Like you may do some illustrations for your day job. And I think
absolutely
that's kind of the best part of having a creative career, is you can kind of shift it depending on your needs and where you're at. So I like that. I'm into it. For anyone just joining, if you're just joining, Natasha here, she's working on her illustration in Photoshop. Come join us at behance.net/Adobe Live. Send us your questions for Natasha while she works on this illustration, and we'll get them answered, because why not? You have her here. She's live, guys. She's live. This is not a replay right now. In the future, when you're watching this, it'll be a replay, but you can still ask her questions over on her Instagram and on her social. But right now, drop us some questions. We'll answer them, and we'll continue seeing how this illustration comes together. Yes, Bliss Art says, watching her add the shadows is so gratifying. I fully agree. It is very rewarding to see kind of this whole thing that at first was like one flat object. All the shapes just kind of unveiled themselves.
Yes. And like my favorite thing is like if I did a screen record, like watching a time lapse is just so satisfying.
Yeah. And you're like, all those hours of work and in 30 seconds.
Yeah. I want to dive, I want to move on to the next one. Wait, where are we? So like, okay, this is sort of like, if I had really like finished what we had just done, like, you know, this is just with those two layers of shading. And you can also see like the face is coming to life a little bit. The face kind of like differs a little bit from the rest of the illustration in that like, I didn't create the shapes for the nose in Illustrator. Like I just kind of do that like sort of like freehand, I guess. In Photoshop, I've just found that like it's just easier. So like I'll just do that in Photoshop. But the rest of it is just basically, you can see that like two sort of layers of shading. And I did go in, like you may see like there's a little bit more brown in here. And so like this is starting to like pop out a little bit more.
It definitely like has a lot of depth to it.
Yeah. And so like from here, like this is like feeling pretty close. I think like the next thing I would typically do is I'd go in with this dark color, which I usually like, you know, this is the same color as the eyes, the hair and whatnot. And like in the areas where I feel like it's like where the darkest shading would be, I would sort of like add that color a little bit more. So like, you know, in like areas like this where it's like a little bit like it's getting a tiny bit lost, I might like add like, and this is not like the same as the other ones where we're like being very liberal with all of the colors. This is just sort of like just like subtle. And that like just kind of helps things pop a tiny bit, you know?
I totally see that ankle was kind of getting lost with all the creases, and now it definitely, you know, I can see the outline a lot more clear with the contrast that you added with that shading.
And so that like totally helps. And you know, like honestly, like sometimes with these illustrations, if you don't like sort of give yourself a time limit, like you could like keep on going forever and ever. But you know, that's like something that I mean, that's a little bit over the top, but like you can turn down the opacity. But that's like something that I like to do. Another thing that I think that I like always do that helps things pop is sort of add these very like almost unrealistic sort of like reflected light of the illustration. And like this is just part of like, this is just a stylistic choice that I like to put in. But like basically like what I'll do is like, you know, once again create a new layer, this time turn the opacity all the way up, and this is going to look really bad before it looks good, but basically I'll just sort of like create sort of like a like color overlay. But
I'm scared.
It's all right. We'll get there.
I trust you, Natasha. This is your process. I believe in you and I have total faith, but I'm a little nervous right now.
It's all right. Okay. And then using the like eraser, like on a like somewhat low setting, I'll just sort of like start to like chip away at this and like just basically leave like a what do you call it? Like a sort of thin stripe of like light. And this is just sort of like, this is like to like get those highest points feel like very like kind of, and it just kind of like, I don't know, for me, I like the way that like it kind of makes her look a little bit like shiny and like, you know.
Yeah. I feel like it definitely adds to the range of color, like the depth, the tones, what's it called? Yeah, there's a word there that I'm missing, but you know.
Like the contrast.
Yes. Yeah. To make sure you have your whitest whites, that's basically the cream of the paper and then of the background. And then you still have the darks, which would be as dark as the hair is our darkest color here.
Totally.
Yes. Everyone's loving this. While you work on that and you continue to chip away at that highlight, we have David Bator asking if you're into NFTs.
Yes, I do sell my work as NFTs, and I have them over on Maker's Place as my platform of choice. But yeah, I'm really interested in the world of NFTs. I honestly, I would love to learn more about NFTs. Like I feel like I'm a little bit of a newbie, but like it's, you know, it's a exciting.
It's
new
also
world.
A new space, so you know. Being a newbie is only natural. Oh,
Totally.
Voodoo Val, thank you so much for coming through with that term that I was looking for, contrasting values.
There you go.
Exactly what I was looking for. I just couldn't come up with it on the spot. It happens. It happens to the best hosts. Sometimes you lose a word. All right. I definitely see what you just did there with that highlight. I'm not scared anymore.
Yep.
I get it. And I have full faith in this process. But that does look intimidating. Is there a reason why you do it that way as opposed to the same way you worked on it with the shading?
Yeah, I think that like this way, like I feel like, so like when I do that, like sort of like big, sort of like aggressive stripe, I sort of like to go in and sort of like, because you really want it to be feathered like here. So like right now my like, I'm going in with a eraser that's at like 50%. So it's like, you know, it's taking off quite a bit. Like sort of like, I'm kind of like generally shaping it out. But then sort of like once you get to like an area like where it's where you're ready to sort of like start to diffuse a little bit, like you can like turn down like the opacity even more, make the grain even bigger, and just like I'm basically like not even touching it, you know what I mean? I'm just kind of like, I mean, I should have taken more off to begin with, but like it just like there's something about like
such
like
a
the
soft
ease.
touch.
Yeah,
I think it adds to that smooth feathered effect that if you have done it, if you had gone in with just the white brush the same way you did with the shading, it might look too sharp.
Yes,
the edges it won't be as blended as the shading we have here, which is so smooth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Hello, Kenneth in the chat. Hello, Haley, Melissa. Shout out to you guys in the chat. Love it.
Can't believe people are watching. This is so great.
We're working together here. We have a little community going. I don't know about you, but I feel like I always just work by myself. So I love these streams where we can work together and like learn a little bit from each other. And right now I'm learning so much from your process. I can't wait to play around more in Illustrator and see what I can do when I bring it over to Photoshop, because that's something I haven't done just yet.
Yeah, it's super fun.
It's beautiful as well.
Thank you.
So aside from being an illustrator, I know you mentioned earlier that you have a podcast called The Self-Taught Illustrator. What inspired you to create that podcast?
Yeah, so I mean, as we were talking about before, like I am just a huge fan of podcasts. Like for me, it's just like such a great medium. And I like, you know, I'm always sort of like on the hunt for like podcasts about illustration. I know that you yourself have one too. And so I was super excited when I found out. And
podcast friends.
Like it's such a great medium. And sometimes like, you know, like there are a lot of like people out there, like, I mean, illustration is a visual medium, of course. And so like, you know, at first I was like, wait, is this possible to do? But then as I started like listening to podcasts and hearing like I love listening to, especially like podcasts where they do interviews. Like mine is just me speaking, but like the ones where like illustrators, you know, of even like varying sort of levels of like experience and like success are being interviewed. Like I love listening to people's journeys, sort of like what they've been through, how did they get where they are. And so like part of me was like, oh, I just like love to sort of like talk about illustration, you know, like I feel like there was, in my mind, I didn't think that there was a whole lot of sort of like option. Like I feel like a lot of the podcasts I was listening to like kind of assumed a certain level of like being a professional. And so like part of me, like I basically like when I did start it, I was also like, I still consider myself like, you know, like like I'm not an expert in any sense, but it's kind of like, I want to take people on this journey with me to kind of like, you know, to sort of like, let's work through this together. Let's, you know, let's talk about the industry.
You don't have to be at the end to speak on something. You can be in the middle of the journey and still have a valid point of view to bring to the conversation. Yeah. I love that your podcast is about being self-taught, because I think there's a lot of, I don't know, maybe guilt or like weirdness with being self-taught as opposed to having, you know, conventionally gone to art school. And even though you went to design school still, you know, it's very empowering to see people who are self-taught kind of put their work out there and still kind of make a name for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it can be like a little bit daunting, you know, like I think that especially like, I don't know, like, because like I think sort of like one of the first steps is sharing your work. Like you could like create sort of like all that you wanted, but like, you know, like you need to at some point start to like get it out there, and like, you know, art is meant to be consumed and shared and like, you know, commented on, talked about. And I think that for a lot of people who are self-taught, there's a lot of like anxiety around like, oh no, what will my friends think, what will my coworkers think, like, you know, there's so many like weird things that go on in our minds. And like, you know, unpacking that stuff and like talking about just like normalizing it is so like, I feel like important.
Yeah, and normalizing the fact that like even though maybe you didn't pursue it in an official capacity, you can still start and then just start exploring the space and exploring your style and your voice and sharing it as you go. You don't have to wait until you've reached this whatever perceived level of readiness to start sharing your work. I feel like people should start always sharing their work as soon as they feel proud of it.
Totally, totally. I couldn't agree more.
Speaking of being proud of your work, I saw that you recently did an illustration for a magazine, a pretty big magazine. Can you tell us about that project, that process? I know it's similar, I'm assuming, to what we're seeing now. So give us a little bit of that. Tell us how that went.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was this one was like an interesting one because I it was over Christmas and I was on vacation visiting my family. So my family's from Poland. And so I was there and I was like on vacation mode. Like I didn't have my computer with me. I was like, you know, I like don't want to be doing work. But then I got an email from someone from Cosmopolitan magazine, and they were like, "We love your work. We'd love to sort of like you know, hire you to create a set of illustrations for our like first issue of the year." And I was like, "Oh my God, this sounds so cool, but I am on holidays." So like, I was like, you know, thanks, but please like keep me in mind for future opportunities, but I can't right now.
Yeah. Bold of you, very bold of you. I like that.
I mean, it was like, you know, like it was great, but like there was no way that I could like, you know, get it done realistically. But then the person wrote back to me and she said like, "Oh, like, well, could we license an illustration that you've already done?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. Like if it's not already sold, because there's some that I had already sold as NFTs, like I'd love to like let me know and I'll let you know which ones are available." And they picked one that I had done that I actually was selling, but I hadn't sold yet. So I like delisted it and basically sold it sort of like licensed it to them for for their magazine. And it sort of like showed up on a like a page with like horoscopes for the month in the magazine. And it was cool to see like an illustration in print. I was like, wow.
Yes,
fancy.
that's so amazing to see something go to print and just like hold it.
Yes,
So
just
cool.
different.
Yes. Haley, yeah, seeing your illustration in Cosmopolitan was so cool. So
Aww.
people are seeing it, people know it's your work. That's amazing. And on the topic of licensing, is that something that you do often? Can you tell us more about licensing, what that involves for any aspiring illustrators in the chat who are now curious as to what licensing entails?
Yeah, totally. So my experience with licensing it's kind of minimal. I haven't done like a lot of it, but basically like, you know, licensing means it's sort of like, instead of like creating like an illustration and like where they would pay for it, licensing is sort of like they almost buy the rights to it, where it's kind of like they license it, but then they can basically use it for like whatever they want, you know. So like they're buying this illustration from me or licensing it, but it could like show up, for example, like on a billboard. They could put it on a t-shirt. And so like with licensing in my opinion is cool because you can typically ask for like higher like a bigger rate for it.
Nice.
And so like my experience with licensing isn't like, I don't have a lot of it, but I do know that like something that I always like, I think what a great way to get into licensing is actually through like platforms like Creative Market. I think that is a great way to sort of dip your foot into the world of licensing. Like it isn't for everyone. It definitely, like, depending on what kind of art you create, what sort of your goals are in your style, in your, in your practice in general. But I think that licensing is awesome because it's creative market can be awesome because it's like you're not waiting for those huge clients to come along and be like, hey, we want to license your work. You're licensing to sort of like it's like a direct to customer licensing model. So it's like anyone can pay for the usage rights to a illustration and they can use it sort of like I think there's different levels of like what they can use it for, but it's a great way to get started, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's like such a cool revenue stream for illustrators that I feel like can sometimes go untapped. Yes. Because I feel like it's more common maybe with something like photography or maybe more kind of graphic icon type of systems. But yeah, even with illustrations, oh my gosh, that was so satisfying to watch that nose highlight come together. If anyone in the chat noticed that, let me know. It was amazing. I got distracted by your creative process here, but yeah, I fully agree. I think licensing is such a unique way to get your work out there, and it's kind of like a little bit underrated, or maybe it's not underrated. Maybe it's just mysterious because it's like not talked about too much. So I love that we can have these conversations here on the stream and maybe expose people to all the possibilities.
Yeah, totally. And I think that sort of like, as I'm making my way through this journey of being an illustrator, it's like sometimes I'm learning those sort of things and like learning a bit about licensing or, like my experiences on different like selling platforms. And I feel like that's another reason why I thought like, podcasting would be like a cool sort of, thing to try. Cause it's like, it's like sharing the wisdom is like, is important.
I totally agree with that. Speaking of, licensing and that being like a whole new revenue stream, is there another, and then we talked about your NFT and we talked about your podcast. Can you tell us about more of the ways that you have kind of built your creative career to not only like monetize different aspects, but just like get into different spaces? What other spaces are you in aside from the many that we've mentioned?
Yeah. So I mean, we mentioned this at the top of the live stream, but so like I do like coaching and mentorship. So I have a course that helps people find their illustration style. So that's something that like, I started up last year that like that has been sort of like my main focus in my practice. Like I think that's sort of like where I would like to grow, and it's been like extremely rewarding. Like I think like it's just like, because like teaching is so much of like what I love to do. I think that for me that's sort of like what I would consider like the core of my business. I think other than that, there's been like, bits and pieces that of freelance work, but then also like opportunities. Like I did like Adobe reached out to me a while back and like asked me to create like a TikTok for them, because I'm like obsessed with TikTok and like I just love that app.
Is the best app out there aside from all the Adobe apps, of course.
No comparison.
No, in the chat, you feel me? I totally get that. TikTok is amazing. It has a really, really thriving creative community. So it's such a fun place to be right now.
Yeah, I love it.
I know you just mentioned your illustration style kind of class or coaching. What would you say are like the main elements when we think about illustration style that people should be thinking about for their own work?
Yeah, I think that like, so like in my course, the way that I sort of like set it up, like, I don't have it like on hand here, so I could be like butchering this a little bit, but like there's like different like steps that we take. And like one of them is really sort of like, as I mentioned before, it's kind of like, it's all like this sort of like self-reflection, and sort of digging in to like what makes you you. But like one part of it is also figuring out, looking through sort of like known accepted illustration styles. So like, I typically don't like to like I'll get a lot of comments sometimes being like, what's your style called? And I think that like my style doesn't have a name. And I think that that's kind of like the way it should be. Like, I feel like our style shouldn't be like, I have a, so-and-so style, this is what it's called. And like, these are other artists that have the same style. But rather, I think like, I like to look at sort of like styles like the rubber hose style, like that, like Disney sort of spearheaded, then looking at like Art Deco and sort of understanding these different styles, what makes them unique, sort of like what are those like defining principles within those styles, and then sort of like figuring out like, what is it like, is there anything here that you are drawn to? Like, is there something here that like you could imagine yourself like experimenting with? And so like, that's one of the like, just one step of the process, but like understanding, it's kind of like a crash course on art history, basically, just sort of like understanding what's out there, where you can sort of start to like,
maybe like what your style's rooted in order to then extract the elements that make sense for your creative practice.
Exactly. And I think that like, that's like one of the steps that like I like to teach. Another one is sort of like, it's like sort of this like exercise where you sort of like figure out what makes you you. And these can be extremely abstract concepts. So for example, like I love like historical cities. Like I love traveling to cities where like there are castles and like cobblestone streets and like museums and libraries. Like that's my like it's not illustration or art related per se, but like that's just part of like something that I feel like makes me. Like I love rainy days over like hot summer days. And I feel like that's something that like it all sort of adds to this like big picture of what makes me. And then in what I teach, we sort of like create visuals that go with those ideas. So it's kind of like translating a very like kind of something that's emotional into something onto paper.
Perfect. Yeah, I feel like that's something really hard to do on your own because it requires a lot of like self-reflection and kind of, it's like when you ask someone else to describe you, it's easier than trying to describe yourself. And I can totally see why like having someone like you helps someone through that, an aspiring illustrator or an established illustrator that's looking to really fine tune it, would be so beneficial, and then like kind of hone in on all those key elements to really drill it down.
Absolutely.
It can be really challenging to do that on your own.
That is true.
You're speaking about all these different influences. What are your direct influences? I know you mentioned earlier like historical, like art history, but are there any other things that influence your style? Because you have a very distinct style here with these kind of elongated limbs, a tiny head. Where is this all from?
So oh my gosh, I wish I had my like style guide up here now, because I like have it all written out, like where everything comes from.
I would love to see that. That would be so amazing.
Yes, maybe I can get it up for tomorrow's live. But I definitely, so I mentioned rubber hose, and like for me, like the rubber hose limbs definitely like this sort of like influence of this sort of like comedic, sort of like exaggerated forms make their way into my illustrations, but balanced with sort of like this like femininity, sort of like this idea of romance. There's like a balance between sort of like seriousness, but then also they're kind of like absurd in their form. I feel like there's this idea of like strength in my illustrations, where it's like kind of like, you have these sort of bigger limbs, they're
not all like dainty or anything. There's some like weight and different proportions, because you're playing a lot with the proportions.
Exactly. And I think that through like through those like through those proportions. Like proportions are huge, but like even like facial features, like it's like all those things that I like have found that like had made me were sort of like extrapolated and then sort of filtered through like this process that like I feel have like helped me come up with my style.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. And so now I think you've moved us to another stage of the drawing. Can you,
Yes.
explain to us where we're at?
Yes. So you'll see that so where we landed off, I like was adding those like final like bits of highlights. And then in this illustration, there's like additional sort of like mini highlights. Like you'll see like on the lips, I added some like of that lighter color, some shading under here. I also went in and did like the hair. So like, kind of like in the same way that I was doing the whole body, I like also went in and like used like sort of like a multiplied color and did like gave that
like liquefied.
Yes. That was definitely like sort of like the aim here, especially with this like highlight here where it's kind of like feels a little bit like liquid. But here I also made the decision to like, I really just like, as I was creating this, I was like, oh, I want to give her freckles. So using that same brush, I kind of like splattered some like larger grain on her body, just like, just as a in the moment decision, no true depth behind that.
It looks cool. And that was just like that same brush just blown up.
Yes. Yeah. So just like getting it like super big and like kind of just like clicking around, just giving her freckles.
So cool.
Yeah.
It definitely adds more personality to the whole thing.
Yes.
Like,
I thought it was
it was very cohesive as it was, but now you added that like final touch.
Yeah. And so like
oh, I'm so sorry. Go on.
No, you go.
All right. Have you ever used airbrushing in like real life? Because I feel like this technique is so the way that you're shading everything reminds me so much of an airbrush, especially like the eye highlight is just really takes me back to like a airbrush that you would see at a carnival or something like that. Have you ever worked with airbrush before?
No, but like I really want to. Like I think that would be so cool. I think like I've had this sort of like idea that I would love to like paint, like just go back to analog and like paint one of my illustrations one day. And I feel like airbrush will probably lend itself best to like achieving the same effect.
It definitely would. I mean, it's very tricky, but it's such a cool medium.
Yeah.
Aside from digital, what other mediums have you worked in?
So like I like back in the day took like an oil painting class. I think like back in my like even in my landscape days would do a lot of like sketching, pen on paper, that sort of thing. But yeah, other than that, like I mean, like also like in landscape architecture, you do a lot of like models with your hands. So there's a lot of like using foam core, using like different materials to sort of like, but it's less character work and more like landscape and like ground forms and things like that. So
I get what you're saying, but yeah, I feel like airbrush would be the perfect medium for you. Maybe even some sort of like ceramic or something, because you have all these like limbs. I could totally see you rolling them up into figures and sculptures. I'm just throwing out ideas because I love the work and I'm just like, oh, I could see this live in so many different ways. It's beautiful. Val is asking, what is the freckle brush?
So it's the same. It's the same brush that we were using before, which is my custom brush. But basically, in the way that we were using it before, it was like we were using the brush at a very in a very like we were using it like this. But for the freckles, we just blow up the brush and like kind of use it more like a stamp to kind of like and then you can see that like you're sort of like creating these more like big speckles.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's such a lovely effect.
Yeah.
So where are we at with this, Natasha? Is this complete?
So we're very close. I wanted to sort of walk through sort of like a process that I like to do at the end, towards the end of my illustrations that I think is like a godsend. Like I don't like to rely on this too much because like it doesn't always work out well. But once I have my illustration, and if I like group everything into its own like folder, I typically I'll duplicate it. I'm just going to hide the one underneath just so I don't lose it in case like I need to go back and do make some like big edits. But then if I like merge this group, like now it's like all on one layer. And so for example, for this illustration, like when I was originally creating it, I was like, oh, like there's something about her, like the shape of her head, which was kind of like irking me. And then also like the shape of her arm here, like it felt a little bit too thin for me here. So like here I would go into Liquify under filters. And this is where you do some like, this is like really fun, but like should only be done at the very end because it's like you can't go back and change things after this. But basically like, in here you have like your like, what do you call it? Like push, pull, bloat. And here you can make like very subtle, don't want to do that. Or very subtle like changes. Yes. And so like here, like, I'm kind of like manipulating the shape of her face just a tiny bit. It's not like making a huge difference, but like for me, like it was just bothering me. So
yeah, I can totally see how this effect really lets you kind of further explore your illustration, specifically because of that, like the style that you have really makes sense with this brush.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. That was just like the quickest fix, because otherwise you would have to, I believe, go back to Illustrator, update it, then kind of try and match up all those shadings. It would be a bit of a hassle.
Yes, exactly. Like it's just like it's good for like very small changes, it's like you don't want to like completely rework it because like it can look bad really quickly. But like I'll just do a quick undo so you can see like what change that made. So like if you focus on the face, for example, you can see that like it's subtle, but like I don't know, it helps my eyes. Maybe other people don't really notice the issues.
I notice it. I could also see how that's valuable. Just like, if you wanted to bring that foot out a touch, or you wanted to, with any parts of the body, just kind of move them in and out a touch. It's totally useful.
Yes, exactly.
That's so cool. Let us know in the chat if you've used the Liquify brush before, because that is magical. I myself haven't had a chance to use it yet, but that looks really, really interesting. So is this, would you call this final?
Yes. So basically like, I just wanted to like, also, I don't know if people are very familiar with the Liquify, but like one of my favorite things is like I think it's called bloat, but basically like you can make things like bigger. Ooh. So it's like,
so you can like, further play with those proportions.
Yes. It's just like, and you can even make things smaller. So if you wanted to have like a super, super big, like bug eyes, or like, it's just things get crazy.
You don't want to get too crazy with it, but it's definitely, for those final tweaks, looks amazing.
Yeah. So like cool. I would consider this like the character herself is done. I flattened her, so like there's not much going back. But then basically like after that, I will sort of like go in and like try and figure out like what I want to go in the background. I think I've found in my style, like I just like to have very minimal backgrounds, maybe with like just like some suggestion of some nature, some plants, some flowers. And then I also like really love putting in this like subtle reflection that kind of like makes it look like she's like, I mean, she's very shiny. She's in this shiny environment. Like everything's very like reflective and shiny in this illustrated world. And
everyone's loving that background. I agree.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. One thing that I think is like also like important is like this sort of last pass on like color and editing. And so like you'll see here, that was sort of the original, but just adding like a little bit of a level change here, sort of like.
Could you walk us through that before we wrap up? And for those in the chat, we are wrapping up shortly, so drop all of your questions in the chat so I can relay them to Natasha before we wrap up. But yeah, walk us through that, because that was really cool, and I feel like it looked dramatic, like a dramatic change for me.
Yes.
But anyone else?
Yeah. So I feel like this is so key, because I like, I feel like this looks fine. It could be very well be like the end product, but I just always like to go in and like at least try to see if this will help. So like I'll go in, add levels, sort of like do a clipping mask onto that, and then just sort of start to like, there's no science to it. It's just sort of like what starts to look better. Like I kind of like her to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more contrast, and it just like generally like feels nice. So like, you know, like that, she's just like a little bit brighter there. Sometimes I'll even go in with like a hue and saturation, which again, like you have to be very like subtle with this, because you could like, you know, make it like super crazy, but like, you know, there's just like, you know, a slight changes, like even like +3 on the hue, like here, like I kind of like that, you know, like even like the saturation, you could like go up or like, you know,
dull it down, mute it.
Dull it down. Like there's like so much you can do here. And it's just like, these are the like final things that help it pop and help it come to life a little bit more. And then like the shape in the background is just like a little bit like, I don't know, just like arbitrary. Just I like gradients in my work, and just wanted to give her a little bit of like something to sit on in the background.
Yeah, I really like that gradient. I feel like it really brings everything together and makes it kind of feel a little bit more finished as opposed to floating in space. So valuable. I really, really like that. Amazing. I feel like we've learned so much from this stream. We are down to the final like 5 minutes. Could you walk us through maybe a few other illustrations that you've done in the same style, if you have them, maybe on your Instagram or something like that? Or just show us a little bit more of how you apply this technique to different projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to just like walk over to my profile. So, I mean, as I mentioned, like I like to do a lot of like teaching, a lot of education. So if you are sort of decide to follow me over on Instagram, like that's something you could expect. We talked a lot about earlier in the stream, sort of like the difference between shading in Photoshop and shading in Illustrator. So like, please feel free to like go in and check
it out.
Yeah, check it out. Like I try to be as like descriptive as possible, but like you can see here, like, you know, this is the finished product in Illustrator versus Photoshop.
Just way more dreamy and creamy.
Yes,
in
creamy.
Photoshop.
I love that. That's such a good way to describe it.
It's true. It's way, I love that texture that Photoshop adds. Before I forget, there was a question in the chat about where to get your brush that you were using throughout this stream. Maybe you could show us where to get that.
Yeah, so you could go to my website. It's also linked, like if you go to this like links in my Instagram bio, you'll see like you can get the Photoshop brush here. I have a tutorial that sort of like goes through basically the process that we just went through. So, you know, no need to watch that, but you can like go and buy the brush.
You got an edge for joining the stream.
Yeah.
Now you know exactly how to use it and you're ready to start applying it. This has been wonderful, Natasha. I feel like I learned so much. I love that rose that you showed in I feel like one of these Instagram posts. That rose looks so cool. And I'm sure, I know did you use the same technique for that?
Yes, same technique. Just like the different layers, the shading. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. So before we wrap up here, can you just remind people where they can find you, maybe aside from Instagram? Because I know you're, you know, on all sorts of different platforms.
Yes.
So give us a little run through here.
Yes. So feel free, like I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, also at Nataszko. I also have a YouTube channel where I try and post like sort of longer tutorials that go in a little bit more detail. We also mentioned the Self-Taught Illustrator podcast. And I think that about covers it.
There's so many places to get her content, to get her artwork. I love it. So Natasha, before we move on, can you give us a little a wrap up of what we learned today and what we can expect for tomorrow?
Yes. So today we took a sketch. We took it into Illustrator, built out the shapes, and then transformed that into Photoshop, where we added all the shading, the details, the finishing touches. So going from sketch to final illustration. And in tomorrow's stream, we will be going through basically the same process. Tomorrow, we're going to be using a different illustration. This one has like a little bit of clothes on her. So there's going to be that added sort of like element of clothing. But yeah, basically same sort of gist.
I can't wait to see that, because I was very curious today how you would add dimension to the clothing without making it seem like maybe she's trapped in it or something. So I'm very curious to see this process tomorrow. I hope you'll tune in tomorrow. Same time, same place, and we'll be here. But before we move on, I just wanted to remind everyone that our week of women doesn't stop here. So stay tuned for the XD Creative Challenge with Elise immediately following this stream, followed by a brand new show called Power Prompts with Cody Bear. So make sure you catch that. Don't go anywhere. And Adobe Live will be back tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Pacific with a Creative Cloud Express stream to start your morning. So tune in with Julia Vaca on Adobe Live as she uses the app to design business cards. You know you need some new business cards, so tune in and catch that. So thanks so much for being here with us today, for joining us. Natasha, thank you so much for showing us your workflow. I can't wait to see what you have to bring to the stream tomorrow.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. I can't wait.
Thank you everyone in the chat. Thank you everyone in the chat. I'll see everyone tomorrow. Goodbye.
Bye.